Okay, welcome to the second webinar in the Migration, Ethics and Theology webinar series. My name is Kaja Rønsdal, and I'm an associate professor at the Faculty of Theology, University of Oslo. And I'm one of the members of the group behind this webinar series, which is a cooperation between the Scalabrini International Migration Institute in Rome and scholars from Nordic countries who were part of the research project Nordhost, Migration and Hospitality in the Nordic Context. This international project held a conference in Rome in 2019 with colleagues from CIMI and Urbaniana University, which marked the ceremonious start of this webinar collaboration. Today's webinar is titled Governing Through Fear, the Populist Narrative and Human Mobility in Europe. And we are very excited to hear our invited guests. Practically, just so you know, the program with our speakers will last until 5 p.m. when they will sum up. After that, we have half an hour for questions from the audience. And the way to ask questions is by the raise hand function. And we will try to see you and make it fair that whoever is first gets to speak. But you have to be patient with us, and you're a lot of people, so it might be impossible for all of you to ask your questions, but make sure that you use the raise hand function, and we will try to give the word to everyone who wants it. First, I'm very happy to give the word to our keynote speaker, Dr. Kleptan Hørhager. She is Associate Professor of Communication Studies, Director of Educational Abroad Programs in Italy, and Program Director of the ACT International Human Rights Film Festival at Colorado University in the United States. Her research and teaching interests are in intercultural communication and international relations, European studies, global conflict, othering, cinematography, and critical media studies. She's the author of 2 books, Communicating the Other Across Cultures and Migrant World Making, as well as a range of other publications. We are very excited to welcome Dr. Kleptan Hørhager to this webinar. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Can you hear me well? Excellent. Thank you very much for the beautiful introduction. I'm very, very honored to be here. And when we say communication studies in my discipline, we typically refer to a lot of disciplines. And that's why today you will see a melange of cultural, media, politics, and art influences, all ambitiously packed in one presentation. What's even more ambitious, upon the request of my absolutely phenomenal colleague, I took up on a goal of summarizing 10 years of migration crisis in Europe. I don't know what I was thinking, but I will try. So that's our agenda for today. We will start with a little bit of introduction, migrant realities of Europe, and also the prism through which I will be looking at this, single stories and cultural othering. Then we'll look at a few things about representation. And in this particular case, I will look at 2 kinds of representation, media representation and frames that are very typically used by various media outlets. I looked at primarily European outlets, but also some international outlets to see what kind of tropes and metaphors I use to refer to migrants and what kind of accompanying images are there to construct our social reality. And we will also slowly transition into rhetoric. There, we'll look at a few cases of political rhetoric of last decade. So different political leaders, how they speak about migrants. Are they invitational? Are they confrontational? And I will try to see what happened 10 years ago and slowly progress to the most recent strategies around the islands of Lampedusa in 2023. But I don't want to be too negative. So that's why we'll look at different kinds of things, but also look at the resistive rhetoric. So, and there we will look into visuality, film and documentary, materiality, primarily art, and also what kind of rhetoric otherwise, with other voices and other vistas we have experienced in the last couple of years. So plurality of perspectives. And we'll have a conclusion, connectivity and migration world making. So where are we today? Today we are, unfortunately, more or less where we were 10 years ago. I remember 10 years ago, there were so many kind of pieces of news coming from all kinds of outlets telling us about crisis in the Mediterranean. And we see that right now at Lampedusa, we are back where we started. And every time you see very provocative titles like Italy rejects NGO ships happening, you will see all those images of people trying to reach the infamous Fortress Europe. We also see a lot of movement. That's why we talk about the century of globalization and non-stop migration. And the top 10 origins of people applying for asylum in the EU would be Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, Albania, Pakistan, Nigeria, Iran, and Ukraine. And even that is fluid because we constantly see that push and pull factors keep changing. And every time there is a new war, there is a new push factor, we might see changes in this. How does it affect the rhetoric about the problem? We see that the majestic Mediterranean also became problematic in terms of communication. It became nicknamed as the biggest cemetery of Europe. And this year does mark the sad anniversary of the crisis, 10 years, because we always refer back to October 2013, this huge tragedy at Lampedusa, the vessel carrying almost 500 people and 368 people lost their lives. And then you fast forwarded to now, and we see that a lot of people, even more people, tried to reach the island and also lost their lives. When we speak about Europe and the European Union, we see that Italy, primarily Italy, but also Spain and Greece are the first respondents to the crisis. But we also see how different countries are engaged. For example, Germany is among the biggest recipients of refugee or migrant communities. We observe almost 2 million people in the last 2 years. But we also see how many countries are a little bit less enthusiastic, let's put it this way, about migration. For example, well, when we talk about Brexit happened for many reasons, but mass migration is definitely a contributing factor. And what unites a lot of national rhetorics is kind of this phenomenon of othering, which is a very negative perception of migrant as kind of the scapegoat for many social ills. And just to give you what I mean, like an explanation, what I mean as othering, and also single story. The single story creates stereotypes, said a beautiful Nigerian writer, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. And very often when we, for example, look at the representation, we see that single story of negativity. And here I'm just giving you a very brief map of negativity of many places of origin of migrants. This is not to say that migrants are the only others, because if cultural othering is performed in all its atrocity, it can reach the most negative forms, the most kind of drastic forms like genocide, like Trail of Tears or Holocaust. But in any case, migrants are often among those others across cultures, which brings me to the next point of my presentation, which is representation of migrants in the European Union, but also around the world. So what are the most popular media frames? And the most commonly used media frame is death. And you could look here on the left, I always refer to the source. Here we have Amnesty International, EU Observer. We see children's shipwreck. We see death of so many, inaction, apathy, and hostility of the European response. We see further death. We see deadly authoritarian regimes. And wherever we look, death will be at least one of the metaphors. Another very common metaphor, also accompanying images, would be that of invasion, which is another very negative frame. So the Guardian, British Guardian, tells us thousands of people have arrived and invaded the tiny island of Lampedusa. Washington Post tells us invasion, 5,000 illegal migrants arrive in Lampedusa in one day. Other famous frames would be chaos and crisis. CNN tells us Europe's migration policies and chaos as arrivals surge. The Guardian also tells us nearly twice the number compared with the same period in 2022 is now in 2023, causing crisis, causing collapse. of the system and border chaos. And Al Jazeera reminds us also this is a major emergency. So once again, very alarming, very negative frames. Another frame often used by media outlets would be that of crime. And when I refer to those frames, I once again try to refer to the last 10 years because they always take different kind of peaks. So for example, this one from Deutsche Welle in Germany was from 2018, where migrants may be responsible for most of the recent rise in violent crime in Germany. And Wall Street Journal tells us, also referring to Germany, in 2016 and 2017, that crime in Germany tied to migrants jumped last year. So we see here 2016, 17, and 18. And a more recent one is from the French Le Monde, where French President Emmanuel Macron in October 2022 says that that when we look at criminality in Paris today, we cannot fail to see that at least half of the crime we observe comes from people who are foreigners, and he correlates high levels of criminality with immigration, especially illegal immigration. Another popular frame is that of terrorism, and I think it's hardly surprising, especially considering what happened just in the last couple of weeks, right? We've seen Euronews. So Europe and the world must prepare itself for more terror attacks, according to Belgian terrorist specialists. Today, it's France and Belgium. Tomorrow, it can be anyone, right? So there is kind of like, let's unite in being alarmed is another call to action. And here we see New York Times referencing to the Belgium, to the LN24, which is a source from Belgium, saying, referring to this terrorist, who was a man identifying himself as the attacker, said he was inspired by the Islamic State extremist group. And in different discourses, you will also hear that he was originally from Tunisia and he came, but of course, to Lampedusa, and he wasn't even supposed to be there, but he's there. And that's a very common thing to kind of hear this frame of terrorism again. What comes as next is probably natural, but it's another very famous frame is that of a wall. And this is also another international thing, because it's not to say that let's build a wall is like never happened in the United States, but in Europe as well, we have this frame of wall them out. And here we see, for example, Greek Prime Minister, right, here in the picture. So in 2021, Greece finished building a long wall on its border with Turkey. So, and you see here pictures from 2023 at the ceremony, making the extension of the country's steel fence to kind of stem the flow of refugees. And on all this, you also see one last frame I wanted to address today, which would be about united. Well, this is my wishful thinking about divided European Union, divided in terms of how to address everything we cannot kind of address ahead of time, because there is a lot of critique that Europe is again reactive in terms of instead of being proactive. And BBC tells us that in even the most recent visit by Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Ursula von der Leyen, who's European Commission President, that they visited Lampedusa, but they were completely detached from migrant realities and realities of people who live on the island, and they couldn't provide adequate responses. And also CNN accuses the global north of not pulling their weight in terms of responsibility for the rest of Europe. So we see that there is this division in European policies, but also in European thinking about the other. Which brings us to another kind of perspective. So if that is the media perspective, what do our political leaders tell us about migrants? Different things. And Hungary is probably one of the most provocative ones, and I'm giving you the most recent one, which has some disturbing rhetorical frames. So Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban declared that Hungary would not accept the distribution of refugees by national quota. All terrorists are basically migrants. You are importing terrorism, crime, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. Muslim migrants are all invaders. Migration is poison. And probably the most disturbing one from my humble perspective would be this one that was in the reaction to proposed laws on migration. If you're raped legally, forced to accept something you don't like, How would you like to have a compromise and agreement? It's impossible. I do think that it's at least very tasteless to mention the metaphor of a rape coming from the position of power as in such case. Let's turn to other countries. So a very, very controversial, but very important politician, Matteo Salvini, who used to be Italian Interior Minister, time in office 2018-2019, also very active today. Now Meloni's main coalition partner. What was he famous for? Anti-migrant sentiments and quite a few very nationalistic statements such as al centro gli italiani, we see this at the center Italians, or Italians first, or stop the invasion. This invasione was a very repetitive frame, or la pacchia è finita, the party is over, which is only a frame which is only partially funny, considering that it was one of Mussolini's favorite expressions. So that's very controversial. And the last one is the most recent one from 2023, also mirroring a little bit Orban, saying that a criminal act and the act of war, all those developments. This is not to say he's the only representative voice. If you look at Giorgia Meloni, granted her positionality and also her task is not very easy, given just how many people come specifically to or through Italy. So in 2015, and here's from Corriere della Sera, we have quite interesting statements about basically what was called an ethnic substitution or general test of ethnic replacement in Italy. So what does it mean? So she was complaining that a lot of young, very capable, very able people are leaving the country. It's called fuga di cervelli, or a brain drain, basically. And instead, we're getting the majority of people coming here are all African men, and saying that if we open doors to all immigrants on the planet, we are exposing our own people to poverty and very miserable lives, so they are forced to leave. And the last three ones are response to the most recent crisis, saying, I won't allow Italy to become Europe's refugee camp, and we cannot just resolve crisis by talking about redistribution, but we also need to stop departures. And she's being very proactive in this and trying to unite other leaders in this response. Italy is definitely not the only one with this worldview. Let's look at France, and this is one of kind of the rightish leader of French Rassemblement National, former Front National, Marine Le Pen, who is nicknamed, at least in the United States, like a French Trump in a skirt. And so is the politics. You can say also a lot of very nationalistic responses here. Maintenant la France, and now France. She is the one strongly advocating for Frexit. You also see in the image that they're kind of those two hands breaking chains of the European Union. So she doesn't consider European Union a very positive thing to begin with. She always refers to globalization as literally mondialisation sauvage, so it's savage globalization. Also, she claims that French colonization was a very beneficiary act for uncivilized cultures of Africa. She suggests giving ultra-French names to people born in France. So even if they're ethnically, let's say, from the Maghreb region, it wouldn't be advisable to call them, I don't know, Mohammed, Ahmed, Fatima. It should be Olivier, Emmanuel, Guillaume, Jérôme, and then things should be better. And the most recent one, she really is calling for a legal wall to be erected against immigration. Here is the most recent reaction, this time from the Interior Minister representing the President. So French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin says that I'm going to Rome to offer Italy help in holding its external border and assist with deporting people, but not with welcoming people arriving in Lampedusa, because we just simply can't. We will not take in additional migrants because we cannot manage, basically. And especially we cannot manage to integrate them properly into the French society. What do we have coming from Germany? Oh, a lot of very like drastically different things that happened at the very beginning of the crisis, where Germany became known as for its Willkommenskultur, culture of open welcome. And basically Angela Merkel, who was at that point even nicknamed as Mutter Teresa or Mutter Angela, so come who may, and wir schaffen das, like we'll make it work. But then very quickly she was challenged. Wir schaffen das, aber wie? So we'll manage, but how exactly? And then other negative frames started being applied. So like Messermigration, it's knife migration. And instead of Mutter Teresa, she was nicknamed to Mutter Terroresia or Mutter Blamage, mother shame, for basically importing terrorism. So she was accused of that. And today's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he's also a little sluggish with his response, basically saying, yes, we're all of this together, but we need to introduce border checks with Poland and the Czech Republic, and the number of refugees is too high, and we're in complete agreement on stopping irregular migration to the European Union. So that's the official response, but we also have AfD, which is Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, extremely right party. That's also unfortunately gaining a lot of influence in the political arena, also claiming that it's always migrant violence and immigrant dystopia. And you can also see from the images that neo-Nazism is also strongly provoked by this increasing number of refugees, which brings me to the next point of the presentation, which is the resistant part. And I promise it's not going to be as depressing and one-sided. And so let's see what else is there to talk about migrants, maybe differently. We have visuality and film supporting those realities. One of the most powerful ones is Quando sei nato non puoi più nasconderti, a beautiful film, which is based on a book, but the film just became a little bit more popular. Short story, a very privileged boy on a yacht falls overboard at night. His parents think he's dead, but he is not. And that illegal boat saves him. And the idea of kind of seeing that and experience things from the other side opens his eyes on the humanity of the other, if you wish. And there is a dialogue, and then him trying to help this entire group when they arrive, and completely changing and opening his mind. A very powerful piece of communication, if you wish. Another one comes from 2011, and this is Terra Firma, or Mainland. A very similar story, also two contrasting realities. We have this beautiful island of Lampedusa, just to make sure that Italy is as tiny, comparatively tiny as it is also a beautifully diverse country. And the south and the north are two very different places. And when we talk about Sicily, and when we talk about islands surrounding Sicily, it's a whole different story. And here we see kind of the super rich having their vacation, but also the super unfortunate, and very strict laws prohibiting the locals to save those arriving people, and this family and this Felipe, main protagonist, saving, comforting, and breaking the laws, all those strict immigration laws for the sake of humanity. Also gives us a very new perspective. This is, for example, from fictional film. One of the most beautiful documentaries, and my personal favorite, is El Dorado, which is by Swiss filmmaker Markus Imhoff, who you can see here in the very middle against the beautiful blue background. Why is it so powerful? Because it's a personal story, because this story challenges Italy as a country of immigration, bringing it back to the country of emigration, where during World War II, there were many people coming from Italy, and his specific family, they basically, there was this beautiful girl, Giovanna, who during World War II ended up in neutral Switzerland and became his so-called sister for a while. But then when the war was over, she had to turn back to Italy, but then she died because of trauma and malnutrition. And that story affected him so much that he started thinking about migration differently. And even at the very opening of this documentary, he says, "I'm dedicating this to you, my sister, who is in the start." It's like heartbreaking. Every time I talk about it, I have kind of like, I have a very strong emotional reaction, because it's such a kind of once you see it, you can never look at people just in terms of numbers and votes, and it goes under your skin. Anyhow, these are all very strong alternative images. Let's look at alternative pieces of art and materiality. This is actually called Gateway to Europe, Porta d'Europa, and this is actually at Lampedusa, a very different image from invasion. This project was there to make people understand it's there, and we want to commemorate countless deaths of so many people who tried to reach Europe. This one has a very strong title, Barca Nostra, or Our Boat, also, right? Biblical reference here. Was one of the main pieces in 2019 at the International Exhibition in Venezia. And actually, it's the actual boat that sunk in 2015. And the Swiss Icelandic artist Christopher Buchel decided to give it a new life so that we can see that we're kind of in this together. And instead of just creating beautiful art, we also need to regain responsibility for what's going on in the world. So La Barca Nostra 2019. Another beautiful piece of art, also from the same year, by Bruno Catalano, who also represents the other side, because he's Moroccan and French, and so many other stories are in his own story, because he originally is from Spanish Jews who had to migrate to Sicily, then to Tunisia, then to Morocco, then to Marseille. And we see that, he created this entire series. You can see kind of people missing part of their body and also soul, as he would say, because they're empty, because they also carry the pieces of their past, but also they leave a lot behind, a lot of roots. And he specifically says that their bodies remain torn by separation, exile from a place in which they were rooted. And he also says that it's a source of benefit, so that migration is a source of benefit, innovation, dynamism, work, and cultural openness. 2019, we have a beautiful piece, Angels Unaware, which is in the very middle of Piazza San Pietro in Vatican. And here we see so many migrants, and they are basically, this specific piece is supposed to kind of cut across time and space, because we have 140 migrants and refugees from various historical periods traveling on one boat, and they include indigenous people, they include Virgin Mary and Joseph, they include Jews fleeing Nazi Germany, and those from war-torn countries. And Pope Francis was the one who unveiled it, and who once again criticized global indifference, saying, well, the poorest always need to pay the price. Fun fact, he was not only was he the one who unveiled it, he was also the one who commissioned it after he saw a very famous piece by the same artist, Homeless Jesus. And that homeless Jesus appeared in many places, and also caused some controversies, because in the United States, somebody confused him with a real person and called 911. And this is where the statue became even more popular. And so you can see this specific statue of homeless Jesus in multiple locations: Buenos Aires, New York, Madrid, Melbourne. So it's a traveling piece, but I thought of all pieces to represent materiality, that probably would be the most fitting. Speaking of the Pope, this is another powerful presentation of rhetoric otherwise, because unlike our political leaders, where we hear a lot of negativity, here we try to see more of kind of, we are equal, we are all of this together. And interestingly, in his very first official visit outside of Rome, when he just became Pope, right? Of all places, he chose to go to Lampedusa right after the first big tragedy, and he criticized globalization of indifference, and criticizing all of us that we became very used to the suffering of others, and claiming all of them are our brothers and sisters who are here to find serenity and peace, and instead are finding difficulties, right? And if you fast forward it to 2023, we see Pope Francis now in Marseille. Also, another curious fact, he was invited to Paris, but he said, when I go to Paris, I'll see the protocol. If I go to Marseille, I'll see people. I choose Marseille. And so also criticizing those metaphors, saying, well, the Mediterranean has been transformed from the cradle of civilization to the graveyard of dignity, and we need to do something about it. So it's not the tomb and clash of civilization, but should be a place of reciprocity and encounters. And people are here not to invade, but they are looking for our welcome and saying that the Mediterranean mirrors the world. Probably one of the most important lines for today would be that the Mediterranean mirrors the world and the south is turning to the north, and we're all connected. Which brings me to the very last piece of encouragement to stay connected to people we call others, and to seek for connectivity with the migrant, because he or she is the new brother, the new sister. And that's why I want to explicitly thank my absolutely phenomenal co-author and dear friend, Dr. De Sanctis, Veronica De Sanctis, for inviting me to be here, because she's one of the reasons this book, Migrant World Making, is even written. Where we collected stories from all over the world, and it's not the story about the other, it's a story told by the other, about their new realities, about their new negotiated identities, about their new home place, about the way people adopt and communicate and connect, how they tell and retell their stories, how they engage in social media activism, how they protest, how they write their stories and write our common new story. And that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Keptan Hørhage. That was absolutely food for thought, images for thought, and I'm sure we all had our list of movies to see become quite a lot longer this afternoon. Thank you very much. You were impressive to say so much but so clearly in such a short time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our second speaker is Dr. Åsa Nausner. She works with issues of migration, integration, and interreligious encounters, exploring what it means for the church to be listening, networking, and involved in projects in marginalized communities. Furthermore, she works with interreligious youth work involving methods of storytelling, challenged by populism, racism, and Islamophobia. Dr. Nausner will speak to us about her experiences from working with migration in Sweden today. So please, Åsa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So the borders are not so clear between theory and praxis. I left theory to work with practice, and I'm very happy to work in Örebro. What is happening in Örebro in these times of global migration? A lot. How are people feeling in Örebro? It's a mixed bag. It's a tough time to be a migrant, to seek asylum, to have a migrant heritage, to have a non-Swedish name, to have a non-white skin color, or a non-Christian religion. Segregation is growing, yet integration has also come far. Ethnic Swedish people are challenged to be more welcoming and to relax in the encounters, according to my view. The wars are influencing us now, the last years, very much, making a lot of stress and distress. It's a time where we are not supposed to be tricked into fear over against each other. I work in the Church of Sweden, the Lutheran Evangelical Church in Sweden, which is a dominant denomination with 5 to 6 million members. It used to be the state church, but it has changed since the year 2000. I am now a practitioner with a task to support colleagues within 8 congregations in our parish regarding issues of migration, integration, interreligious encounters in the city. I work with pedagogues, pastors, diaconesses, and volunteers. My title is, I think it's the only one in the Church of Sweden, a strategist for encounters across borders. Sometimes we discuss if we can get across the borders or if we can just reach as far at the borders. Borders can separate us, but they can also become meeting places if we stay there in the little stress or the uncomfortability of being there. And this position was created in this parish in order to be more networking in a situation where the Church of Sweden is losing members, is becoming smaller, and need to network more in the community. I'm a well-educated practitioner. I lived 7 years in the US and I lived 10 years in Germany, working with almost the same issues. The issues of migration has been very much similar in different places where I've been. My job is wonderful, risky, and challenging. It's important to have my institution in my back and support and find support all over Sweden and also internationally to do this kind of work. Maybe we do too little of studying here in practice locally. So what is it to support intercultural and interreligious encounters? We do educational program, we try to engage in different networking activities. Sometimes it falls on my task to apply for money for integration projects. And if I do that, I become popular. Someone needs to support the financial work for this. Yes. Here are some of my friends. At the conference at the diocese in Strängnäs, where I live, one of the pastors in our team with the vice chairperson of the mosque in Örebro. We realize when we go to trainings or when we go to programs and share about interreligious work, we need to go together. No one wants me to share about the work with migrants. But when we go together with migrants and with social actors locally, we receive a lot of interest. Swedes need to meet religious representatives and are eager, but also a bit afraid, or they are slow to the real interaction. Örebro is a charming city of about 150,000 inhabitants between Stockholm and Gothenburg. It's a large parish, and we have 160,000 members in our city, but less than half of the population. So the Church of Sweden is becoming a smaller actor than it used to be. We have 15 churches. The slogan for our church council is that we should, based on God's love to the world, be a social agent in our city. We should work with others to do good. Doing good means in this time to work towards social and ecological sustainability. In Örebro, you find 3 big Muslim congregations, a large Syrian Orthodox church, several other religious groups from all around the world. I'm not so good at figures, but we have around 4,000 Muslims in our city. And in Sweden at large, I think we estimate about 250,000 inhabitants of Muslim faith. Total population is about 11 million. Since 2015, all different kinds of churches in Örebro has worked with language classes, but also more and more programs of social information, study trips, trying to grow with our migrants that came at that time. Now you cannot take a bus or a taxi, a cab in our city without meeting someone from the migrant community. We must also remember that the migrants came much earlier to Sweden at the end of the last century. We had a lot of people from Bosnia-Herzegovina. We had Syrians and Kurds from the 70s, 80s, or the 90s at least. And before that, we had Chileans, earlier. So we are becoming multicultural, even if our politicians are talking less and less about that what we are. One thing that's become more difficult is to help migrants with their paperwork and legal processes due to the changed legal system in Sweden. We who are not lawyers feel very much stress in doing the right things for the people seeking our help. it's come that far that we must say no to people because we know we cannot provide the right help. And that's very stressful for volunteers, for staff, and even more for migrants. Often we find people seeking churches as a last resort of hope to get help. So that means we get to deal with very difficult situations. A lot of people we call migrants are actually really social actors. They are Swedes. They are new Swedes. They are learning the Swedish way of forming organizations. They meet in ethnic clubs, choirs, football teams, churches, and mosques. They organize. People in migrant communities carry out social work to a large extent. Our migrants are becoming Swedish citizens. They work all over town, not at least in the area of health and old age care, and they take political office. Their children and grandchildren are often born in Sweden, but they don't really know the language of their parents or grandparents. It's very difficult to define a migrant, I think. It's such a large category with such a mixed group of people, cultural, religiously, legally, social status. And what I miss in Sweden compared to the US, for example, is we don't have the double identity naming of oneself. Are you a Swede? Are you from Somalia? Can you be Swedish Somalian? We don't really have that name, but I think a lot of young people would really need that term. The public narrative is changing. I have worked here now 8 years and I really feel it. We miss the talking about human dignity from our politicians. The tone of politicians in seeking to counter crime, drug dealing, including dealing with the shootings we have had, connected to drug dealing, has become harsher, and prejudice are generalized in a way not healthy for any community. Asylum seekers, people without papers, and the Muslims are being talked about as a threat to our society, almost like terrorists, as we heard before. We also see that the politics of welcoming Ukrainians in Sweden was in a way good for the Ukrainians, but created a different track for migrants, which was making other migrants who came at the same time or had come earlier, like a second class of migrants. So the migration politics has created a lot of stress among migrants. So I participate in many networks and groups. Here you see part of our interreligious council. We have one group which meets with the politicians in the city. And here we are standing in a newly built mosque in their room where they have earth energy. Do you say that in English? This is the energy room for a mosque in Örebro. And we are talking about the environmental crisis in this group. So we try to connect and talk about problems in our society, but also about positive things. How can religion contribute in our society? The Interreligious Council that it started was formed already 2006, and it was an initiative not at least from political leaders from migrant communities to build bridges to discuss issues across religious groups. We have then had a lot of criticism against Islam. You remember the cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad, for example. And that group has met since then, and it's like a low intensive group of communication. And I think it's really helped us, especially during the pandemic also, to bring information to all religious groups. It's been interesting to see how, especially during the pandemic, we had to ask straightforward questions to each other. How does it work in your congregation to talk about these vaccination things, for example? It became more naked conversations in times of crisis. Sometimes we also meet without politicians, or we do very much meet without politicians, actually. And last Tuesday, on the 24th of October, we had an interreligious prayer on the marketplace in the city, just to show people that even if there's a lot of prejudice among, especially for Muslims in this time, we religious leaders in Örebro, we can talk together, meet together, we can pray side by side for peace. We also organize different kind of activities during the Human Rights Weeks here in Örebro. And we have a network we call Faith Encounters Faith, Tro möter tro in Swedish, where we meet from different religious groups. And it's like we need time for these encounters. We need to meet regularly. We need to sit down and drink a lot of tea together. We need to talk a lot together. And slowly, it's not just, we don't have just energy for one thing, but we create trust among ourselves. And we can listen in on the different needs in the different groups. That's been my main learning, actually, that I shouldn't have so much, I shouldn't be stressed to do a lot of things, but I need to wait for the group, or we need to wait for each other to see what do we want to do next.
2 minuter också. 2 minutes.
2 minuter. I think the most successful thing we have done is that we work with youth, and we have a youth leader is my colleague in the Church of Sweden, and he works with Muslim youth leaders. And sometimes you go on camps, they do go study trips, and they just meet to play bowling or something. Here, the youth were asked to build a wall of prejudice. And they listed racism, they listed fear of not looking good. And it's just been amazing to see when you bring youth together and they feel trust to share. They also engage each other against bullying, for example. And what we try to practice is listening to each other's stories, as we heard in the presentation before also. And we have learned from another youth group in Stockholm, storytelling. We try to create safe space for youth, sharing their lived history of ethnicity, migrant situation, and religion. And this is a very touching moment, and we become really persons to each other, and it becomes a very naked interaction. We try to do this more and more with women also. And actually, some of our pastors are saying we need to do this storytelling among ourselves in the Church of Sweden churches, because we don't talk religion among ourselves. But we are still looking for a good strategy for our work. Some things are successful, some things evaporate, but and we learn that interreligious and intercultural work leads us to the need of working even more with Islamophobia and racism, which I didn't talk so much about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nausner. This is a small applause from me. It's very interesting to hear how Dr. Nausner and Dr. Kreptan Hörhager really intersect in stories and storytellings from different perspectives and different forms of storytelling. So thank you very much. It's important that we hear from those who are close to the humans and the challenges that we are concerned with. So finally, that leaves us, okay, we have to give you some extra minutes, 10 minutes to my two colleagues here in this network that makes this webinar series. First, I would like to give the word to Dr. Aldo Skoda. He's professor of pastoral theology and human mobility at the Pontifical Urbanian University in Rome, and executive director of the Scalabrini International Migration Institute, CIMI, also in Rome. And both Dr. Skåda and Dr. Wille will give us some reflections after hearing our two colleagues. So, Dr. Skåda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you even for the colleagues that talked before me. It was really interesting, and I would like to connect something that you shared with the field of theology. And I imagined my intervention given a title like From Fear to Fraternity, the Journey of the Christian Community in the Age of Migration. Actually, as we hear, we are witnessing today, not only in society, but also within Christian communities themselves, an increase in the feeling of individual and collective insecurity and the emergence of the theme of fear. This theme is not only present in public and political debate through the securitarist paradigm, but is also present as a practical foundation for concrete decisions, political, social, and cultural, as well as pastoral. At the center of the fear is, of course, the stranger, who takes on the face of the migrant, the refugee, or any person who seemingly threatens the ordinariness and predictability of our lives. The most widespread strategy to domesticate fear is first to give a real and recognizable face, a process that creates scapegoating and produces stigmatization and ghettoization. The process of stigmatization transfers widespread anxieties and insecurities into certain, particularly more disadvantaged social categories, such as the migrants or refugees, giving the appearance of control that often turns into discriminatory dynamics. Strategies are put in place to reinforce one's position of power through the denial of the other's identity, specificity, and even right to diversity, thus creating artificial barriers that can shape true ghettoization. At the origin of fear, therefore, is a kind of cognitive and emotional simplification of reality, which is a manifestation and reproduction of the primordial friend-enemy dichotomous scheme. A similar thing is told in the Bible. Professor Jean-Louis Carr, a biblical scholar, points out that the book of Exodus describes a paradigmatic path regarding fear. It all starts with the fear or repulsion of the Egyptians in front of the Hebrews considered as strangers and who have been present in Egypt for a long time. They are very prolific, and the increase in the Hebrew migrant population frightens the Egyptian local population. This is because they no longer know who Joseph is. They have forgotten their history. The fear of the Egyptian stems from their ignorance. This fear creates a tense situation that Pharaoh tries to resolve with dictatorial and tyrannical measures, imposing slavery on the Hebrews. The book of Exodus describes in detail the inhuman conditions of the Hebrews at work and the unequal treatment. It recounts the order given to the midwives to kill all male infants. We all know the story of Moses. And finally, the Pharaoh orders the expulsion of all Hebrews as an end solution. Such a paradigmatic narrative offers us a privileged point of view to affirm that in reality, both Bible and history of Christianity itself are marked by stories of migrants and migrations. In this perspective, I would like to highlight three elements that seems relevant to me. First, move our perspective from ideologies that feeds or justifies fear of the other to theology that promotes a welcoming and inclusive vision. The theological vision, biblically founded and expressed in a Christian anthropology and a prophetic eschatology of hope, becomes the background that guides the reflection and action of the Christian community. The Bible, I'm quoting another biblical scholar, Cruiserman, from the migration of Abraham and ultimately probably from Cain to the little one laid in the manger, is in its basic line a story of man living, migrating, seeking bread, land, and protection, wandering and returning. And among God's many commandments, only a few others equal in importance and clarity those concerning the right of strangers and refugees. According to Daniel Grudi, part of the challenge that the theology of migration has to face is precisely the cancellation of the divide created by labels. This is to challenge stereotypes by helping migrants to discover, first of all, their own inner strength that comes from being men and women with the inalienable dignity and subjects of rights, rather than assuming an identity that is imposed on them from the outside. Secondly, addressing the risk of victimization, depersonalization, or criminalization of the migrants and refugees with the promotion of an anthropological vision attentive to human dignity. Theology goes back to the root about the concept of person as understood in the Bible and in particular Genesis. Man and woman are created in the image of likeness of God, which is not another label, something added, but the true nature of the humankind. Defining the person as imago Dei means overturning the perspective with which we also address the issue of migration. It means addressing human issues starting from the mystery of God and his presence in everyone, no matter where he or she comes from. According to Christine Heyer, the Christian vision of the person profoundly challenges all commodification and exploitation at play in the context of migration. Also, the category of social sin clarifies the relationship between harmful ideologies and structural injustices related to migration. Third, in the perspective of integral human ecology, build a sense of community through fraternity and solidarity. As Pope Francis says, no one must be excluded. God's plan is essentially inclusive and gives priority to those living on the existential peripheries. Building the future with migrants and refugees also means recognizing and valuing how much each of them can contribute to the process of construction. Much of the pastoral care and social work is characterized by acting for migrants, doing something for them, but is also important the perspective of what migrants can say and do for the church and society. However, both viewpoints, although important and complementary, have an imbalance of power of relationship, because in each of these perspectives, it is always someone doing something for the other. The challenge today to build an inclusive and fraternity and solidarity community is that to do or to act with migrants, as this puts us on the same level, co-responsible for the present and the future to be built. These three dynamics can be a starting point for more concrete reflection and action in the increasingly multicultural context of our social and ecclesial communities. This is also reflected in the final document of the recently concluded synod, where specific reference is made to the need to foster open communities, to promote education for dialogue and encounter, and finally, to identify systems of exclusion and injustice, not only society, but also within the church community itself. These 3 points, I think, could be an important point of view and, of course, a kind of theological reflection, even of what we had till now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Skoda. That leaves us, we're a little bit behind schedule. That just leaves a little bit less time for discussion in the end, but that's fine. It leaves about 9 minutes for the last reflections. So that's Dr. Trygve Wyller, Professor Emeritus of Systematic Theology and Science of Diaconia at the Faculty of Theology, University of Oslo. Dr. Wyller's research interests range from fundamental questions in theological research, Christian history of care, to the philosophical theological analysis of social work, as well as religion and migration. The floor is yours.
Thank you all, and I will give a short comment, and due to the very strict time schedule, I will shorten my comment to be very quick into my main argument. One of the main challenges for all discussions on migration is the topic of citizenship. In most cases, what is behind the big conflict on migration is that the migrant person does not have citizenship in the country the person wants to settle in. The migrant is from principle a non-citizen. And then skipping. I think, however, it's time for faith people, churches, and theologians to rethink critically the concept of citizenship. Today, there is such a big distance between the very politically correct concept of citizenship and very important discussions on what scholars mean with citizenships actually today. It seems like the almost only political correct citizenship interpretation in the political discourses is an interpretation where birth or a very long stay in the country qualifies for being a citizen. A citizen is a person who has a passport and can move in and out of her and his country and a lot of other countries with very few challenges. A person who has a passport from a country that is not accepted longer stay in the other country will be returned. And the person with no passport needs to give a long proof process to be accepted legally, if she or he is accepted at all and therefore becomes what is called an irregular migrant, or even worse, an undocumented person. So during the last decades, the Turkish, British, Canadian professor Engin Aysin has come up with a very different interpretation of what is a citizen. In books like the one here, the 1986 Acts of Citizenship, via books called Citizenship Without Frontiers, and also in the very important handbook on global citizenship studies. Aysin opens a completely different path discussing who is a citizen. The book title, another book titled Performing Citizenship, says it all. When people move, act, suffer, and resist unjust context and life-threatening conditions, they become citizens by these acts, by these performances, by these resistances. Aysin is, of course, aware that this definition does not give anyone more a passport. However, what he does is to oppose the legal-illegal binary in the migrant discussion. There might be very different ways of considering who are entitled to be citizen than only the legal one. Do you have a passport or do you not have a passport? I do not claim that Aysin is the solution to the migrant discussion or to the migration politics, and especially to the restricted one in Europe today. However, I think that churches, people of faith, and faith-based institutions can find important arguments in Aysin's radical theories of citizenship. If persons who in a myriad of ways perform resistance to the ruling life conditions and act to change them, even if the acts are not prominent, if this person is a citizen, we come very close to a Christian interpretation of what dignity is and what humanity is. Created in the image of God, who my colleague Aldo Skoda just referred to, created in the image of God, striving to re-establish the basic relations that all people are entitled to have. We do not live as singles, we live as striving for becoming a living we. I think this new interpretation of what makes citizenship is a gift to theological discussions on migration. It does not, of course, as I said, solve the issue. It does not help to avoid the terrible border situations on the seas and along all the walls. It gives, however, Christian theology in ISIN an ally, sociological ally in the political area. You are a citizen because you move and look for new dignity. You are a citizen because you are created in the image of God. I think this helps to resist populist identity politics and to shape a more generous Christianity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uller. Applause to both of my colleagues for these reflections, for adding even more layers to this topic. So I will just now give Dr. Kreptan Horhager a couple of minutes. Do you have any comments to the speakers have been after your presentation? And I will also give you, Dr. Nausner, a couple of minutes after to just hear a couple of thoughts around what we've heard today. So please.
I am absolutely mesmerized just by the connectivity of our subjects. This was kind of my main topic here today, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see how, although we are from different disciplines and different countries, right, there are so many very empowering kind of connections and hopefully solutions. So I have more hope than ever after this. Thank you. This is my main comment.
Thank you. And Dr. Nausner?
Thank you very much for very important contributions. I feel very challenged to work even more with theology, I must say, personally, because we have the same fear within the church as in the society. We have the same arguments floating around. We risk not being the united church for welcoming of refugees. And I think that theology in a broad sense can help us very much. Or even liturgy. Last Sunday in our church, we lit a candle, not just for every dead person this week in our congregation, but for all the dead persons in wars. So if there's a way to bring in suffering in our liturgy, suffering that disturbs us, I think that's very important. And we need popular culture with good images from migrants, definitely. So thank you very much. I'm very inspired. And citizenship, yes. These days, I feel that people who were regarded themselves as citizens with a passport are met with, doubts that they are citizens, you know? So that even though people with passports have a harder time now to really feel integrated and real Swedes. So this is a very tricky area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final words, Dr. Skoda and Dr. Uller. Do you have some final comments before I open the floor?
Well, just 2 words. I mean, I agree with Julian saying there is hope. So hearing all of us, there are more and more, let us say, reasons to build hope and fraternity than fear. But however, in the communication, we perceive the fear as the most important and most present feeling that we have. And this for us is also not only a hope, but also a challenge from all the scholars, academics, researchers, politicians, as well as pastoral angels all the field. This is a challenge not only for the future, but I can say that this is a challenge for today's society and church.
Yeah, very short for me. I also found these different interventions very, very promising. Normally, I would say that theology should also strive to develop a language which communicates with non-theological people. But in this context of migration, it seems to me that to kind of adapt the theology of fraternity, the theology of generosity, all that, it helps to create a kind of extra level of language, which has to be powerful, because we are up to politics which is not generous. So I think there is time and room for languages which keep a realistic utopian theological perspective open, and to act resisting according to that discourse. So that's I think I learned from this webinar also. Thank you.